This is a video for all of you 4-seat side-by-side owners. Before you make your next purchase, check this video out. Hey everybody, it's Nick Olson, Chupacabra Offroad. Welcome back to the channel. And I had an idea for this video on my most recent trip to southern Utah. I was doing a lot of different types of riding, and I was kind of thinking about, man, this video doesn't really exist, so let's give it a go. This video is kind of talking about some of the differences between the 4-seat models, and the differences kind of remind me of some of my other passions. I'm a big two-wheel guy, I'm a mountain bike nerd, as well as being a passionate enthusiast about dirt bike riding. And when you look at some of those channels, you look at a lot of the content creators, they do a really good job of explaining some of the differences and the nuances of these machines. And you know, like Chris Kiefer with Racer X is one of my favorite guys for moto. Rob Rides EMTB is awesome if you're an e-bike dork like me. Pink Bike in the mountain bike world. And what those industries have are they have a lot of machine choices, a lot of bike choices, and they're all very, very close to each other. We're talking about millimeters and ounces and grams that separate all of them. And I also think the customer base in both of those niches are very evolved and all have been riding for a while. They have very particular tastes in what type of ride quality they want based on their riding style and the environments and places they ride. So, you know, I don't really think there's anything like that in the side-by-side space. So that's why I thought this video could be kind of cool. It'd be fun to talk about some of the differences, some of the things I've experienced and my flavor, and things you should consider before you go put your hard-earned money down on a new rig this season. So like I said, we don't really have anything in the side-by-side world. So let's have a good little discussion about this, and let's talk about some of the differences of the machines. And you know, the goal of this video is for you to not only just think about what you're gonna buy, what you think would look cool, but what's gonna feel like the right machine for you after you get it home, after you get it all pimped out, once you take it riding, where you like to go ride, what really are some of the best experiences you might have had, or some of the best trails or rides you've been on, what really floats your boat, what characteristics you look for in a machine, and think about that before you make your next purchase. So let's run through a quick little history lesson of where we started and where we're at. Okay guys, so long story short, these vehicles have gotten a lot wider and a lot longer since the sport started now. The sport started before 2012, and I'm gonna start off in 2012, 10 years ago. The vehicle to have was a Razor XP 900 4-seater. That side-by-side was 107.5-inch wheelbase. I chuckle thinking about that because that's only 5 inches longer than my 2-seat Canam X3, and I've ridden in the back of one of those things going up the hill at Oldsmobile. I don't think it even made it up there with 4 grown men. And if you guys have been in the sport long enough to ride, particularly in the back seat of that vehicle, you know what I'm talking about. That thing was tiny. But Polaris, of course, was trying to make a 4-seat vehicle that would work for as many people as possible in tighter terrain, that type of thing. And of course, that became just a gateway to this huge 4-seat market and all these amazing choices we get to have now. So moving forward, not much long after that, the model year 2014, the Razor comes out with an XP4 1000. The wheelbase jumped up to 117 inches. Now, that wheelbase remained the same until recent with the Turbo S. So it was the Razor 1000, the Razor Turbo S. Enjoyed that same 117-inch wheelbase, and I've owned several of those vehicles. The wheelbase is awesome. It was roomy enough for most people. I've sat in the back of that vehicle before. I wouldn't want to do an all-day ride in it, but I would say it's big enough, spacious enough, and particularly if you have kids that are smaller, then it works out really well. It's a vehicle, the wheelbase works awesome in a lot of different environments. So that was pretty much what set the industry stage for the later part of, like I said, 2015 to 2020. Now, a couple of years later, Canam rolls out with the X3. The 2-seat model really dominates compared to the 2-seat Polaris offering, and it didn't take long before particularly a lot of you sand dune guys really embraced the X3 as a platform. But they launched a 4-seat version, and the thing is huge. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's a 135-inch wheelbase. It is longer than a Suburban, significantly longer than the Razor Turbo S platform. So it was a big change, and obviously there was a room in the marketplace for a competitor. Polaris had ruled the roost for such a long time, so it was great to see somebody else come in and offer a serious competitive option. But for a lot of us 4-seat guys, that just felt like it was too long and really didn't consider it to be a valid competitor to Polaris. Now, as we move along the history lesson, in 2020, Polaris launches a Pro XP. The wheelbase goes from 117 to 125 inches, where you pick up a roomier cockpit, which was needed. Even at 117, the Turbo S is pretty tight, especially if you're over 6 feet tall. 125 ends up becoming, you know, noticeably bigger, but not excessively big. But it really wasn't looked at as that exciting of a car in the Southwest because it was a little overpriced in my opinion. And of course, it was only 64 inches wide. And then fast forward to last fall, Polaris launches the Turbo R and the Pro R. Now, the Turbo R has the same wheelbase at 125 inches, but it gets 74-inch wide suspension, much beefier suspension, better brakes. It evolves into what the Turbo S was. But then the Pro R, unfortunately, gets longer because it does have the 4-cylinder motor. It's 8 inches longer. It's 133.5. So it's essentially the same length as the Max Canam 4-seat model. So a bit of a bummer. I got to drive both of those cars back to back just for a little while, not for, you know, dozens or hundreds of miles, but the Pro R was an amazingly exciting vehicle to drive. It's awesome, particularly in the 2-seat platform, but it was very long and it just doesn't float my boat. It's really hard to get over that, guys, when you're used to that shorter wheelbase. To give you a little perspective, off-road racing vehicles, trophy trucks, that type of thing, they're between 123 and 125 inch wheelbase, and generally they have at least 35 to 40 inch tires if we're talking about a sand car. So, you know, when you talk about a UTV with smaller tires and a much longer wheelbase, there's kind of this magic in the Southwest where the wheelbase between, you know, 110 to 125 is perfect for going over the type of obstacles of terrain, the bumps that we have here, rock crawling, that type of thing. And when it gets longer than that, I think you just really start to sacrifice your performance. It's not as fun and it becomes a handful when you're on tighter terrain. And kind of going back to my Utah trip, I went and did some rock crawling. It was Rally on the Rocks, and this is a predominantly rock crawling crowd. There was very few Can-Ams, particularly Can-Am 4-seaters, as you could imagine. I haven't seen many when you get into those scenarios where you're on the rocks, things like that, or Moab. The breakover angle on it, it's so long, and unless you have 35-inch tires, which the vehicle can't really handle, you have a lot of issues. On top of that, you know, the Visco lock, the old front diff they had didn't work very well. So it's just one of these things where Polaris Razor's always had the upper hand in that type of condition and been the best vehicle, but I'd say even more so for the wheelbase. So fast forward to hopefully this fall, or I'll be picking up my Speed UTV. Now these guys are going to be a new player in the game, and the 4-seat model is 120-inch wheelbase. So as you can imagine, I'm excited. It's one of the main reasons why I purchased it. I think that wheelbase is pretty much perfect. I think they carved out more room. Even if you're a bigger guy, I'm 6'3" tall. Looks like it's gonna be roomy enough in the back seat for my kids, even as they get older. I think it's the right size. It's gonna have that very careful mix of being roomy and comfortable, but also having some fun, playfully nimble feel to it. And I think it's going to be that perfect compromise of being roomy and comfortable, but also being fun and nimble to drive in if you get into tighter, twistier trails. So over the years, I would always consider myself a 4-seat guy because I predominantly own Polaris, and back in those days, the 2-seater was 90 inches and it just wasn't really long enough to get on top of the whoops and hold its line and be as fun in the really rough terrain as the 4-seater. So, you know, I always thought, oh, the 4-seater is just where it's at, that's me. But last fall, I did pick up a 2-seat model, a Can-Am X3, and that's got a 102-inch wheelbase, and it is pretty much perfect. It is long enough to get up on top of these bumpy, nasty whoops and things. It's got huge shocks with a lot of shock stroke. It makes it incredibly fun to drive. It's still nimble enough to go through tight, twisty trails, plush. It just does all of that in a magnificent way, and I wish any 4-seater could feel like that, and obviously nimble isn't a word that we're going to probably use to describe any 4-seater, but going back to what I said, being a bike nerd, you kind of reevaluating what do you like, what makes you excited. For me, it's having a vehicle that isn't so long and cumbersome and boring in a sense. Even if it does have a lot of power, it's still going to take a lot of energy to initiate turns if you're going through tighter, twistier trails. It's going to be a handful on the rocks. Going back to this Utah trip, we rode a slow, rocky river bottom trail called Tokerville Falls, and I'm following my buddies here in Turbo S's, and those vehicles are barely squeaking around some of these rocks, and I was just thinking to myself, like, geez, I'm so glad I don't have, you know, a 4-seat Pro R, a 4-seat Maverick Max. It's just, it's so big. I mean, yes, you can do it, but would I want to do it? Not really. So once Polaris launched a Pro R platform, I instantly knew it was going to be the top player. Of course, we're talking 4 cylinders, 225 horsepower, much beefier in all regards to handle this horsepower and the heavier motor. But you know, the challenge with the wheelbase being longer was a bummer for me on the 4-seat model. I mean, I drove the 2-seater. The 2-seater is very similar in wheelbase. I think it's 2 inches longer than the Can-Am. It was awesome. The one thing I will say is because everything is so much more robust, you can easily run 35-inch tires, which is gonna help you with your breakover angle if you do wanna play on the rocks. So in that regard, it's definitely much more evolved than the Can-Am, but as something I would seriously consider purchasing, the Pro R, it's just kind of hard to wrap my head around, even though when I drove it back to back with the Turbo R, it was such an exciting experience with the power delivery and how much different it felt compared to the Turbo R. But honestly, if I was looking to buy a 4-seater today, I'm seriously considering the Turbo R over the Pro R just because of that length. Now, that sounds a little bit wild to say, but you know, I've brought up a lot of times twisty, fun. I mean, in my two-wheel passions and two-wheel guy, I love single track. Like, I like all types of riding. I love fast desert riding on my dirt bike. I love single track. I love motocross, mountain biking. I'm down for all of it. But tight, twisty single track, that's what I really live for. I love that type of thing, and I like finding trails like that in my UTV that are similar, that are fun, that it's a real driving experience. You've got to be locked in, you got to be looking ahead. You're trying to shake and bake through a lot of these turns. You know, you're trying to stay in front of the vehicle. I love that. So having a vehicle that's fun in those settings is very important to me, and for you it might not be. So that's what this video is about, just kind of, you know, wondering like, hey, what the vehicle you have in your garage now, or what you might want to get, like what do you think, like what stands out most to you? Are you a bike guy like me and you want that lively, visceral feel, which is something that I get to experience with my Can-Am 2-seater. So, you know, now that I've been spending more time in a shorter vehicle, it really resonates with me that feeling lively, feeling what the car is doing, just makes for an overall very fun experience. Not so much like horsepower for me, but just feeling what the suspension's doing and being able to zip through tight, twisty trails is what I live for. So, you know, keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you like, and now that you've got more options, what you might be compromising or what you're willing to live with. I hope this provides a little bit of context for you guys. I mean, this probably explains a little bit more why I'm holding out and I'm very excited about the Speed. I think there's some great things about some of the Polarises and the Can-Am. The Can-Am, I'm really at the moment just kind of feeling a love-hate relationship with it. I like how visceral it feels in the desert going over whoops. I really didn't like it rock crawling at all. And in certain scenarios, the way it bottoms out before a Polaris will. There's certain things that are just weird and hard to get over. I don't like working on it, but that motor and trans combo is amazing. The length of the shocks are amazing. And, you know, hopefully this Speed will be kind of the best of all those worlds. If not, all you can do is try, but I'm excited to see. I think they could have a good platform, and I think that would lead to hopefully the characteristics that I find most important. So comment below, let me know what you guys think. Where do you guys mainly ride? What's your favorite riding spot? What's your favorite trail? What's something that's made you just feel like, man, I can't believe I bought this machine. This makes me so happy. That was the most fun experience I've ever had. How much of it was the vehicle, or maybe you bought something and you're like, well, kind of wish this was a little bit better. You know, I either wanted a little bit more power or what have you. I want a little more throttle control for the rocks. Like, let me know what you think your vehicle is, what you think it's missing, what would make it ideal. You know, we're always chasing that holy grail. The Sports Evolved, I've been lucky enough to kind of drive most all of them, own most of them, and I think the Speed's gonna be exciting to see how it mixes up with all of those. Hopefully it over exceeds expectations. If not, you know, the Pro R is looking pretty good. A 2-seat vehicle is really fun. Maybe the holy grail will be two 2-seat vehicles, but that's not realistic for most of us. It's a lot of upkeep, 2 insurances, two cars to prep, 2 cars to drag everywhere. So, you know, Pro R 2-seater and X3 2-seater would be pretty amazing to take 4 people on a ride. But like I said, 4-seat wise, there's still some great options now. It's cool to see some more options. Polaris is giving you a bunch to work with at different price points, different lengths. So are you a horsepower guy? Are you willing to deal with it? Does the length bother you? Am I just too uptight about it? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.